Hey guys, this is Troy Francis, and you are listening to the Gentlemanly Podcast. I've mentored thousands of men across the world in dating, desire, and personal power, from London to Bogota in Colombia, from Miami to Warsaw, all over the place. This isn't a podcast, though, about pickup. This is not therapy. It's about truth, style, and the mythic art of remaining dangerous long after most men fade. Okay, so let's get into it. So today, the title is I Relapsed for a Woman, Lust, Cocaine, and the Lie of Control. So once again, I'm going to go into a personal story here, which I don't always particularly like doing, but I think it's important for you guys because you need to understand that everybody falls at some point, and it's not about falling. It's about getting up again, okay? It doesn't matter how many times you get punched in the face. What matters is how many times you get up and you recover and you make something of your life, okay? So, in a way, failure, I wouldn't actually cast this as failure as such, but in a way, mistakes and slips and bad things are a feature, not a bug. They are just a part of the process, both in terms of romance, but also just in terms of your life in general. So to set the scene, I have always had a very addictive personality. I developed a problem with alcohol pretty early on in my late teens and early 20s. That went on for about a decade. I was also using various, party drugs as well, the likes of MDMA, cocaine, acid, speed, stuff like that, whatever was available at the time. Really, and I had a tendency to sort of get hooked on those things, and I did, and it got me into a lot of trouble, and I had to seek recovery and get into a program that helped me to deal with those things and to live a life that has been, I would argue, productive and successful in many ways. The program that I attend, people talk about living life beyond your wildest dreams when you're free of the substances. Now, that can mean many different things, but certainly I'm doing stuff now that I never ever thought that I would have done and never would have been able to do when I was actively drinking. However, sometimes we slip, sometimes we can fall off the ladder, and this is kind of what happened. You see, let's put it like this. In a lifetime, a man can meet many different women, and he can be intimate with many different women, and he can have romantic interactions with many different women. He gets given a certain number of, let's say, sex tokens or casual intimacy tokens, if you want to be a bit more politically correct. Okay, you get a certain number of those allocated to you at the beginning of your life, and then you get given a number of love tokens. Okay. But the number of love tokens you get given is far, far smaller than the number of casual intimacy tokens. I think actually Robbie Williams first said this, of all people, the great philosopher Robbie Williams, but it's true. And what I mean by that is basically, yes, you can meet people you're attracted to and you can have fun with them, you can date them, you can have sex with them, etc., etc. But do you really have that deeper connection? Do you have that deep level soul connection with them? And the people that you have that with, in my experience, and also the experience of friends of mine and people that I know, is that it's pretty rare, to be honest. It's pretty rare. It doesn't happen all the time, So I met a woman with whom I fell deeply in love. The most significant relationship of my life to date. Okay? And the issue is, though, that along with the addictive personalities that I have, I also have a very strong self-destructive edge as well, okay? Those things go hand in hand quite frequently, I think, along with things like risk-taking behavior, which I certainly have to some extent, or to a great extent, some might argue. Certainly self-destructive, okay? And so when there's something good in my life, I have a tendency to mess it up, to wreck it, okay? I was going through this was a while ago. I was going through a pretty mentally tough time, and I don't really know why, if I'm being completely honest. But there's a lot of stuff, and I might do another whole show on this, another whole podcast on my childhood and my upbringing, because it's quite a complicated story, and it's well, I'll try and keep it short, but it's quite a long story, and I'm trying to think about if it's worth doing so that I can present it in a way that has some value for you, the listener, because I don't just want to be self-indulgent and talk about myself. But nevertheless, my childhood was unstable at best and pretty dark at worst. Okay, so I've come from that background, right? And I think that obviously has led on to the characteristics that I have that I've described. So for some reason, I fell into this quite dark place where I was physically quite unwell, like genuinely feeling physically ill. I don't really know why. I had some kind of weird stomach, gastric kind of thing that went on for ages. I think it was caused by stress. I was also worried about the relationship that I was in, that I'm talking about. And I also, for some reason, started delving really into the past. I started delving once again into things that happened 30 or 40 years ago with my parents and the way that, my father acted. My father divorced my mother. He then married my stepmother. I had a bad relationship with my stepmother. I didn't feel that my father sufficiently protected me or my sister in that situation. Again, I'm not going to go into huge detail now, but I started to really delve into that stuff again, and I started actually using, I started doing some therapy, but I started actually using AI tools as well, because what's really interesting about AI, if you didn't know, is that you can actually use it as a kind of online therapist, funnily enough. I don't think you can quite beat the real thing. I don't think you can quite beat person to person yet, but it certainly revealed some pretty raw truths, and I went down this very dark alleyway with it. At the same time, my use of illicit substances had restarted in a small way. Okay, so there was the use of things like prescription drugs, for example. Things to make you feel more relaxed, things to make you feel more chilled out, things that temporarily boost your serotonin. Okay, grey area things that you could sort of feel like, well, it's a medication, so I guess it's okay, I can use that. But the problem is, for the addict, and maybe even for the non-addict, I don't know. There's a distinction here, by the way, between what I would call the addict, who is somebody who is just naturally compelled towards this kind of behaviour, versus somebody who, maybe drinks a lot, maybe parties a lot, maybe uses drugs, but they don't go to a spiral with it, okay? And I go into a spiral with these things if I'm not careful. So the Pandora's box was opened by the use of prescription drugs, and probably also the use of some performance-enhancing substances, okay, related to testosterone, let's say, okay? I think you know what I'm talking about, so let's leave it at that. But the point is that when you start to kind of open the doorway, then other things sort of seem possible. So even if you're somebody who, you haven't drunk for a long time, you haven't used anything for a long time, it's easy to be off, if that makes sense. It's easy to be, right, I don't do any of this stuff. But then if you start to introduce little bits of it, that argument, that worldview begins to crumble. Because now it's like, well, I do a little bit of this stuff because I do that. So maybe I could do this, which is a little bit higher up the scale of toxicity. I'm not sure that's the right word, but it's stuff that's a little bit more serious that got you into trouble in the first place. It starts to then become a consideration again. You think, well, maybe I could do it. So over a period of time, one thing led to another, and I started off with these relatively innocuous things that I could sort of excuse in my mind. And then I moved once again inexorably towards cocaine, which has always really aesthetically been my favorite drug. I didn't do so much of it when I was younger because it didn't seem to be as readily available as it is now, and I couldn't really afford it anyway. I did a bit of it, but then, you know, you get to a point in life where it is very readily available, you can afford it, and you can get into a lot of trouble with it. And it's a very, very Moorish substance, basically. I mean, it's a weird thing because it feels great when you're on it, and it simultaneously feels fucking terrible as well because I don't know whether you're watching this, you relate to this at all, maybe you don't, but it's a substance that it massively just boosts your, I think it's serotonin, forgive me, the scientists out there, you can correct me in the comments, but it makes you feel really, really good. But the problem is it also makes you feel, after a period of time, you know, 10, 15, 20 minutes, it can start to make you feel very jittery and a little bit nervous and a little bit anxious and even a bit paranoid. And if you do enough of it and you carry on for ages, then you can go into, well, you can get into a lot of trouble. You know, you can get into sort of, firstly, you become fully physically addicted to it, and secondly, become, well, just mentally messed up, you know, psychotic almost. So you've got to be very, very careful. So sort of slipped into that. Then when you use that, you need, or you don't need, but it feels expedient to have something to sort of bring the level down. Okay. Now the obvious thing to use then is pharmaceutical tranquilizers, right, which are designed to stop or to put the brakes on anxiety. Okay, so a very obvious thing you can do is to use those substances, those prescribed substances. Okay, but the problem with that is those things are addictive as well. I'm talking about the likes of Xanax, what used to be called Valium, those kinds of things, right? They work, but they're very, very addictive as well. Okay, and arguably the withdrawal is actually worse on those things than it is from the street drugs, which is, you know, paradoxical perhaps, but there it is. So you can start to use that, but then you realize, and this is what they always tell you in 12-step recovery programs, you shouldn't do any mind-altering substance at all. So say that your drug of choice was alcohol, okay? You shouldn't then be smoking, you stop alcohol, but you shouldn't then also be smoking weed or, I don't know, doing coke or doing ecstasy or something else. And the reason is partly because recovery in the 12-step model at least is about living life on life's terms, right? And not using chemicals or not using this sort of easy way out to try to mitigate the bad consequences or the things that happen in life. It's meeting life on life's terms. But also the danger is that using a drug that wasn't your drug of choice can ultimately bring you back to the thing that was your drug of choice, okay? And the problem with cocaine is that alcohol is actually very good at mitigating the effects of cocaine, because cocaine makes you high and jittery and like that, and alcohol brings it down. All right, alcohol relaxes you. Alcohol levels you out for a period of time. But then what happens if you lose control of the alcohol? So, and I've noticed this in myself and in people that I've met through recovery and in friends of mine, you know, who use some of this stuff. A lot of the time, it's this balancing act. It's this perpetual balancing act of, oh, well, I could do a bit of this, but then if I do a little bit of that, then it's going to keep me level, and then I'll take some of these pills, and that'll help me sleep, and then I'll do this, and that'll help me wake up. And it's this perpetual attempt to walk a tightrope and keep yourself level. But in the end, it becomes impossible because something always goes wrong. It just stops working, you know, and then you need more of one thing or less of the other. And it's, you know, ultimately it doesn't work, okay? And really, the only thing in my life that I've found to work properly is simply sobriety. You simply just don't do any of this stuff, okay? And it makes things a hell of a lot easier. But it also makes things it can make things feel a bit boring. Okay, because if you've got a predilection towards risk-taking and danger and excitement, and if you're somebody who's probably ADHD, I mean, I know we're all kind of ADHD now, but you know what I mean. You're probably ADHD. You're a bit of a thrill seeker. You like variety. You like novelty. You're going to be drawn to these things. And life without it is a lot simpler. It's a lot cleaner, literally. And it generally runs a lot better. But it's a bit more boring unless you can get your kicks elsewhere, you know, through doing business or exercise or, I don't know, you know, competitive sports. There's other things you can do. And actually, there's a really good book called Dopamine Nation where, I forget the author's name, but she talks about this. And she basically says you should lean into the harder things, like ice baths is a classic example, or cold showers, or getting up at 6:30 a.m. and going for a run, you know. Lean into those things to get your dopamine hits rather than the cheap dopamine you get from this stuff that you shouldn't be doing. So there's an illusion of control, okay? Because for a start, you know, I thought I had it handled. I was just like, yeah, I'm good. No more problems with this kind of thing. And as I say, it's hard to put an exact pinpoint on why this happened. I mean, you could say superficially, well, it happened because there were issues in my relationship that I was concerned about. This is a woman I love very deeply. I was worried about aspects of the relationship. I didn't know what to do. And it caused me to have a bit of a meltdown. And maybe superficially that's true. But I don't fully subscribe to that point of view. I think if you're an addict in the way that I'm describing it here, you just want to get off your head. All right? I could put it more crudely, but you know what I'm saying. You just want to get out of it, right? And things like having relationship problems or losing a job or a business deal goes south or losing somebody passing away or whatever. These things are bad in themselves, but they're also a really, really good excuse to use. Right? Because what better excuse could you have to use than, oh, well, I've got problems with my girlfriend, so of course I went for a few drinks, right? It's classic. It gives you a get out of jail card that everybody is going to get and everybody is going to accept, apart from other people who are, you know, in recovery, who are going to say, what the hell are you doing? But everybody else on the planet is going to completely accept it, okay? And it's easier to justify to yourself. So the woman is not the cause, but the catalyst, okay? And also, I think with me as well, there's this sort of desire for chaos, right? There's that itch, there's that build-up, that hum before the storm, right? And this is something, and I'm speaking just to myself now, really, this is something that I have to be very mindful of, and I have to find ways to control, because on the one hand, you can have a lot of fun and you can be very creative, and I think that, I mean, not everybody, but I think people with these addictive tendencies, they tend to be quite creative. They tend to do interesting things in the world, right? You know, great artists, great writers, great poets, great musicians, etc., etc. But on the other side is the self-destruction, and people end up killing, you know, dying or whatever. So the idea is that you tell yourself, I can do this and I can just do this once. And I was kind of, I think, stepping into a mythic role. I've been watching a lot of Mad Men, which you'll know, the series with about the character Don Draper, who works on Medicine Avenue. He's an ad man. It started in I think it started in the 60s actually, but it was just at the end of the 50s. And they're all wearing sharp suits and drinking whiskey all day and in the office and smoking cigarettes and all that kind of thing. And I think I was sort of just trying to slip into that archetype for a period of time. And so I went to a very, very upscale bar in London on my own, because I like very upscale bars. You know, that's part of the myth, right? It's all of this stuff is myth building. And I'm partly doing it for you guys, because I'm partly creating a character, the Troy Francis character, as a marketing strategy, right? It's partly deliberate, right? I'm wearing this suit, I'm wearing this nice shirt, whatever. Okay, and we're going to upgrade. I'm filming these in in the apartment at the moment, but we're going to start upgrading some of the backdrops and things like that, and try to make this more aspirational. And obviously there's a marketing angle to that, but it's also what I genuinely like, right? It's also and so the content that I'm doing is obviously it's somewhat heightened, but it's also a reflection of me and what I actually like. So I go to this very upscale bar. I'm drinking these old fashions, which is the drink that Don Draper used to drink, the whiskey cocktail. There's some cocaine involved, and I'm feeling great. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling invincible, and I'm not stumbling around all over the place like I used to do back in the day. I'm keeping it together. I'm being relatively sort of, I think, relatively coherent and cogent and everything else. So I felt invincible, but then hollow, okay? And the aftermath of this stuff is the worst thing, because whatever goes up has to come down, okay? And the problem with using substances over a woman, or any situation really, is that it doesn't solve the problem, okay? The problem remains. I mean, if anything, it's going to make the problem worse. But at minimum, the problem is still going to be there, but you're just going to feel like crap the next day. And what ended up happening was that I had a bender which lasted for about 3 or 4 days. And it ended on a Sunday morning when I literally just couldn't do any more. And I was lying in bed on my own, and I just felt absolutely terrible. And I literally couldn't get out of bed all day. I just felt horrendous, terrible, isolated, alone, horrible, really, really, really low, dark moment in my life. Okay? And then, so I physically wasn't able to do anything else. So, I just kind of got through that day. The Monday I felt somewhat better. And then I met up with my girlfriend, and we talked and we reconciled the situation somewhat. But what else do I want to say about this? It wasn't so much about the woman, and as I said, I mean, this is a woman that I love very, very deeply. I've had a few longer term relationships in my life, but none of them have been on the level of depth of this one, and I say that very sincerely. And you can call me a simp in the comments if you want, but it is what it is, And as I say, I think we get given these things very infrequently in life. And if I was to not be with her anymore, would I find the same level of depth? I mean, look, people talk a lot about one-itis in this space, don't they? And, she's the only one for me on the planet and blah, blah, blah. And logically, we understand that's not true, because there's billions of people on the planet, right? So intellectually, we understand that that's not true. And yeah, sure, in the end, you could probably meet someone and get on very well with them and it's all great. But my point is that it's not, in many, many years, you might come across a person like that, a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. You could come across loads, literally, I say come across, no pun intended. You could come across loads and loads of different lovers, but people that you really, really gel with on that level, it's going to be very few. But really, what I wanted feeling, okay? I wanted, and all of this was my fault, and I had to express this to her afterwards. I had to own my actions with her and basically say, look, I created this whole mess and I don't know why, okay? Because my behavior had become increasingly erratic. It had become somewhat unhinged. I created arguments that didn't need to be created. I'd taken myself away for periods of time for no real reason. Then I'd effectively broken up with her. And then I just came back into the scene. I mean, the behaviour was completely unhinged, and obviously it was facilitated by the use of the substances that we're talking about. But equally, I guess it bespeaks something of my own persona, right? That drive for chaos, that drive for self-destruction. And there is a real danger, I think, of letting success in this arena, think that you're cured, right? You think, okay, well, I'm over all that now, or I can handle it now, or it's going to be different this time. It really, really isn't, okay? It really isn't. In fact, if anything, it gets worse as you go on. In recovery, they talk about how your addiction does push-ups. Your addiction is doing push-ups while you are, you may not be drinking, you might not be using, but your addiction is still there. It's still present in you. Now, that has been contested somewhat by modern thinkers who believe that labeling yourself as an addict is a bad thing because it kind of... It's sort of shaming, and it means that you've got that label on yourself, and they say, well, you shouldn't think of yourself like that. You should think of yourself as in a different way because that's going to be more positive. And I get where they're coming from, but I don't agree. And the reason I don't agree is because I think that there are just some people with this proclivity. I just do, right? I'm one of them. I have friends who are also of the same proclivity. And what it basically comes down to is if you pick up a drink or you pick up a drug and you like the effects it has on you, you want to carry on doing it, and you want to carry on doing it basically until you fall over, or you run out of money, or you get arrested, or you die, right? Most people aren't like that. Most people will have a glass of wine, or they might have a pill, or they might have a line or something like that, and then they go, oh, well, that was fun, and then they stop, right? There are some people who have this other proclivity, and I don't believe it's curable, at least not yet. I mean, perhaps neuroscience at some point will find a cure, but I don't think it's curable yet, okay? I genuinely believe it's a real thing. You can flame me in the comments, you can disagree, but that's just my belief based on my own personal experience and what I've observed around me. So let's just talk about masculinity and ruin for a moment. Every dangerous man has a vice. Now, sometimes when me and James do boot camps, we joke privately that all we need to do really is get the students to go to a house of ill repute and drink some strong liquor and do some naughty substances, and that's going to man them up, and it's going to make them into more of the player kind of archetype. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and recommend that you actually do that, and I don't think it's a very good idea, right? I think you can get to the place mentally where you need to get to without doing all of this crap. And by the way, I've told the story many times before, so I won't labour it now, but one of the reasons that I flipped from being a bit of a nerd, a bit of a self-effacing, very unconfident dude into somebody very different was actually because of drink and drugs in the first place. This was like over 20, 30 years ago, whenever it was. 23 years ago, probably, or earlier, actually. It was actually use of substances, prescription as well as illicit and alcohol, switched my mindset. And so for me, in a way, it was useful because it changed my perception of myself, it changed the way that I acted in front of people, and it changed the way that people reacted towards me. So, grudgingly, I've got to say that there was some value in it for me, but I certainly don't recommend it because it also caused me a lot of trouble. And a lot of trouble that's really probably affected my entire life, okay? I mean, my life would have been very, very different if I hadn't have done those things. It might have been a bit more boring, but maybe it would have been better in many ways. I mean, who knows, right? We can't second guess, but it's not something I recommend, but in a joking kind of way, right? There's an element of masculinity which does include having a vice. I mean, and if you look at like the heroes in many sort of superhero movies and things like that, a lot of them, they have this fatal flaw, they have this vice. It goes back to Greek tragedy, doesn't it? It's that Dionysian energy, the beauty, the chaos, the ecstasy, and the desire for destruction at the same time. All of those things mixed together, and that's very potent. If you can channel that somehow, and that can be communicated to a woman, it's incredibly, it's polarizing, but it's also incredibly attractive. And I've said before, I mean, there are certainly, I would make no bones about the fact there are certainly women who would just not find me attractive whatsoever. I'm just not their type, and that's fine. But there are other women who do, and they tend to really, really buy into me. And I'm not saying that to brag, because, like I say, it's not every woman. I can't just click my fingers and turn it on like that. But they tend to really buy into me, and I think part of the reason for that is something about not so much the way I look or anything like that. It's something about my personality. It's something about this fatal flaw that I have inside of me, which either makes them excited, or it brings out their desire to protect, or it brings out, or it mirrors something that is present in their own psyche. Okay, and that often happens. You know, people who are addicts are often drawn together like magnets. Okay, so control is a myth. Okay, the idea that you can just control this is a myth. Instead, what you need to do is make a decision every morning that you are not going to do the vices that are going to cause you trouble. Okay, so it's a daily thing. It's a daily reprieve. Okay, you wake up every morning and like, right, today I'm going to get through the next 12 hours or 15 hours or whatever it is before I go to bed, and I'm not going to ring my dealer. I'm not going to go to the bar. I'm not going to buy some weed off some guy in the street or whatever it is, right? You make that decision on a daily basis. Then you go to bed. Then you wake up the next morning and you make the decision again, all right? That's all you can do, right? It's contingent. It's a daily reprieve, and it's contingent on our vigilance, right? That's just how it is. That's just how it is. So what did I learn, and what do you need to know? Well, you know, you're not weak for failing, but you are weak if you don't get yourself back up again. And I've got to say, right now I'm feeling in a really good place. You know, productively, I think work-wise, productively, things are going really, really well. The business is going fantastically well. I think people can see that. I've had a lot of really positive feedback for, you know, doing this new format, this podcast. We got lots of other stuff in the works coming up, so there's a lot to look forward to. Power is not being untouched. It's about being able to reclaim yourself. Okay, so just because you fall or you falter, it doesn't mean you're not powerful, but you do need to reclaim yourself. Okay. There is a version of you who walks through the fire and emerges cooler. All right? Just think about that for a moment. There's a version of you who walks through the fire and emerges cooler. Okay? So sometimes we go through periods of trial, and that's okay. But it's about what we do afterwards that's the important thing. And that cooler version of you is only going to show up when everything else fails, okay? And sometimes, you know, and it's a tough thing to say, and again, it's not a recommendation, but sometimes we kind of need to hit rock bottom in various aspects of our lives before we can change, before we can make improvements, because, and we get this, you know, even bringing it back to dating and stuff. I mean, we get a lot of guys who will come to us for coaching, and they kind of want to improve their dating lives, but they don't really want it. They don't want it enough. They don't have that real hunger, that real fire. And that's a problem. And sometimes you need to somehow hit a rock bottom of some kind. I don't know precisely what it would be in terms of maybe a relationship fails or something like that. You know, you get a divorce, you hit rock bottom, and it's like, right, I need to do something about this. Okay? Sometimes it's necessary. Again, I don't recommend it. It's better not to have to hit that rock bottom. You can get out of the elevator at any floor that you want, but sometimes that's the only thing that works, right? And like I say, what is important is not so much the fall, it's the resurrection. Okay? So look, if this hit you, and if you've danced with chaos and felt the chill of the come down, and you're ready to rebuild with power, clarity, and style, and this can refer to, you know, substances, but more pertinently probably to relationships and your romantic life, your sexual life, etc., then come and work with me. I offer one-on-one coaching programs and a deeper community inside the Gentlemanly private program. You don't have to do this alone, all right? But you do have to do it when you're ready. So there's links in the description, or you can just email me, troy@realtroyfrancis.com, and we can have a chat and see how I can help you. But I hope you enjoyed this personal story today. I hope you got some value. Leave me some comments. Let me know what you think. Share the podcast, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye-bye.